Meanwhile, we'll continue with Representative Jon Hoadley of Kalamazoo. Promised that we talk about alert bills to start, and so we shall. The idea that when there is an emergency situation that endangers the public, and I guess that's really the key here, that has to be determined, right? The circumstances under which an alert like that would come through, because, those Amber Alerts come through, and sometimes they're at 2 o'clock in the morning, and you're like that old cartoon where the cat gets scared and you're, stuck on the ceiling shaking like a little leaf. They come through loud, so you want to try to be mindful of that, right?
Well, that's right. And, with an Amber Alert, we don't get them all that often, which is why when they happen, we take notice.
Sure.
And so one of the things that we did by working in conjunction with Sheriff Fuller and Prosecutor Getting out in Kalamazoo was start to think about what are the situations where we'd want to be able to issue one of these alerts. How do we make sure that there's a penalty for folks that try to abuse the system? And then at the same time, give a lot of deference to the state police who would act as that intermediary to make sure that there's a protocol that defines some of the scope and scale of these alerts, as well as gives that third-party verification. So it's not just one person in one area making the call, but it's consistent across the state.
So you introduced bills therein, right?
Absolutely. We actually, Representative Iden and I had a hearing on our bills last week. Representative Maturin added one more bill that is another technical fix that we're going to need. We heard them last week. Actually, the Smith family, Rich and Tyler, they came up and they really gave the human element of why this work is important. Mm-hmm. So they were there to testify. I think it was receptive in the committee. Hopefully today they'll be voting it out, and it hopefully then will advance to the full floor.
And that was, we presume, difficult for their family to do that, but obviously they felt passionate about it, that they had to have their voices heard.
Well, the Smith family is so inspirational in the sense that something absolutely tragic happened to them. And one of the things that they were saying after the hearing was they want to find some good from the situation to make sure that if in some small way that this alert system could help another family down the line, then it's absolutely something we need and we should have in Michigan.
So where do they stand now? You had a hearing. Now what happens?
So now they go back to the committee, and the committee may take them up for a full vote today. They're on the agenda for noon, so hopefully we'll have an answer shortly after noon if they advance or not. If everything goes well, they'll be voted out of committee today, and then they move to the full floor. And so then the next step is making sure we can get on the agenda and get them in front of the full House for consideration and passage.
Anything that could trip us up in that?
There's a lot of I think the details still have to make sure everyone feels educated on. Yeah. Representative Iden's office and my office have been doing a very good job at trying to touch base with all the folks that may be impacted with the system along the way. So making sure that we're connecting with the state police, that we're working with broadcasters, that we're working with advocates and the cell companies, everyone, so that they feel good about it. And so far, we haven't had any opposition as long as we keep working through the details. So assuming that continues to go well, hopefully this system could become a reality potentially this year.
Mm-hmm. So you feel comfortable then with the boundaries that you've developed by consulting the sheriff and the prosecutor in Kalamazoo County, saying, okay, this situation would warrant that kind of alert, this one would not.
Well, and one of the pieces that is still undefined is that we'd actually defer a portion of that to the state police to create the final protocols. And, we've kind of given some parameters about what we're looking for, but we recognize, state police are the experts when it comes to this public safety aspect. Right. So that's why, in consultation with Sheriff Fuller and Prosecutor Getting, we said, let's leave a big chunk of this to the state police. And I think that's an area where Representative Iden and myself agree. Let's trust the experts to put the finishing touches on what that protocol would be.
Mm-hmm. But it seems as though there's a lot of buy-in here. You talked about Representative Iden, Representative Maturin. These are Republicans. You Democrat. We're working together here. Isn't that nice?
And, even at the hearing, we had Senator O'Brien come in and testify her support. So we're having it's really a bipartisan effort. It's really a Southwest Michigan effort. Mm-hmm. And I just love to see us, all working together on those places where we can agree. Let's get something done. This is a smart public safety move. It will cost the taxpayers literally no extra dollars because we're using pre-existing technology, pre-existing staff, and it's going to better inform the public. So it gives law enforcement a tool, it gives the public a tool, it uses the taxpayer dollars more efficiently, and this is a win all around.
So there'll be a Senate version, you think?
Hopefully we're going to move the House version through the Senate.
Yep.
And Senator O'Brien testified to that effect, that she said, she also introduced a similar package of bills, but said the House version was moving faster. And it's just great to see everybody coming together to say it's not about whose name gets on a bill or anything like that. It's about keeping us safe. And so let's just get it done.
Mm-hmm. What is the reaction you've heard from your colleagues from other parts of the state? I mean, we certainly would be passionate most about it since it happened here and nearby, but do you get that? Do people get it across the state?
The more that we talk about it, the more folks say it's a great idea. And, something tragic happened in Kalamazoo. But this system is something that anyone could use across the state. And it's not just for an active shooter situation. Part of the bill says it has to be a persistent, random, ongoing threat. So again, it's not just any time that there's something bad that happens. But imagine if there was a significant chemical spill. I think about that big pileup we had in 94 with 193 cars, right?
Right.
And there was actually a portion of it that folks had to be evacuated because of some of the chemicals. So that would have been another place we could have utilized the system to push it on everyone's phone who's in the region, not just going door to door to the folks that were impacted by the spill area. This is a great example. People can see their own communities where this may come up in the future. There could be, like I said, it could be a bomb threat. It could be a significant chemical spill or other health hazard, or it could be an instance of gun violence or other forms of violence.
Yeah, and so this thing sounds like it's got traction and it's going to move quickly then.
We did not see any significant opposition yet. And I think it's one of those things where this really is a good idea. It's a nonpartisan idea. And like we said, it combines sort of those best practices of utilizing money we've already spent to build this important technology, as well as making sure that we're keeping the public better informed. So hopefully it gets passed quickly.
Only everything could be so easy, right? Representative Jon Hoadley's here. We're back shortly on WBCK 860 tonight. Representative Jon Hoadley's here from Kalamazoo. So alert bills moving along, and now drones. We discussed this a little bit before the top of the hour. It seems like you do have to get to this fairly quickly because you can just go to any old store, it seems, and buy a drone now.
Absolutely. And, one of the big concerns that folks have is that how are the folks that are going to willfully misuse some of the pieces with the drones. If you want to get a fun drone and you want to send it up to, learn about technology or have a good time with family, go for it, right? The problem is, and we all know this, there's going to be people who try to abuse the system. That's why we've seen some legislation that's been pushing back on things like your right to privacy. You can't go fly and take pictures with these drones. I mean,
wow.
Kind of coming in and spying on you. But we got to make sure that the laws apply specifically to these instances. Because you don't want to give someone that sort of gray area where they can try to wiggle out of it. And one of the other pieces that we just saw some legislation moving on was about using drones to commit crimes. So making sure that there is still culpability. Again, you don't want some slick lawyers trying to get their client off by saying, it's the drone shot the gun. It wasn't the owner, right? And, I've been working on some legislation that's going to try to make sure that other prohibited items in Michigan, things like bombs or automatic weapons and these sort of things, you can't sneak them through, again, on drones. And you would say, this is common sense. What are we doing here?
Right.
But the reality is that as the technology advances, we got to make sure that the laws keep up with it. Because the first time that someone would get off with these types of excuses, and they'd say, well, the law doesn't say, everyone would be complaining.
Yep, right. So who helps you figure out what the laws should say in this? Should you call on the aviation industry or something to help you figure it out?
That's one of the things that we do a lot in our job. It's you're talking to folks who are the experts in these areas. So you're talking to aviation experts. You're talking to prosecutors who have to deal with these issues. You're talking to law enforcement who are investigating these crimes or these situations. And they're letting here's some of the problems, right? And a gray area doesn't have to be a bad thing because there's a lot of times where we want to trust people to use their common sense and judgment. But that the person you don't want to give a lot of gray area to is someone who's trying to commit a crime.
Right.
And they're doing it, and they're just trying to skirt the law. So that's one of the areas that we keep doing a lot of work in, and I would love to hear folks' opinion on drones.
Is there a law now that prohibits somebody from buying a drone, strapping a camera to it, and flying to the outside of your bedroom window and looking in?
Putting a camera on a drone is not a crime. And so
Right.
the question might be, how they take the picture, of whom are they taking the picture, where is the picture being taken, and what is the subject of that picture?
So there might be some laws that it trips over in asking those questions.
Correct.
But specifically about the camera on the drone, it's not there yet.
Just sort of like there's nothing that prohibits right now attaching a gun to a drone and flying it around.
Yeah.
Now, there's some questions that about, if you use that gun, then inappropriately, what happens?
Sure.
But it does raise questions about what are the risks that we're now assuming by having, again, marginally trained pilots, right? Like any one of us could go buy one of these smaller units right now and go throw it up right now, and it's fun. Like, they're fun. But the question is, if a hobbyist is starting to modify them in a way that could potentially endanger the public, how do we just make some lanes on here so people can have fun, they can experiment, and they can tinker, but they're not going to threaten anybody as well.
Mm-hmm. By the same token, I mean, how fast is this interest growing? Do we know? I mean, you walk around in your backyard and you don't look up and see drones going by, generally.
It's growing really quickly. It's one of the industries that we've seen huge growth in. And, this sort of idea of what is a drone and their accessibility, we're only going to see more versions and more frequency of drones as the production increases and prices go down.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the great things about our economy, right? In the marketplace, how this works. But it also just does speak to, let's let folks learn, let's let folks have a good time, and let's have some common sense sort of guidelines in the law so someone isn't abusing new technology to get out of a crime that they're trying to commit.
All right. So where are we with that proposal then?
I would say look soon. We've been, again, a lot of this sort of legislation takes a minute because you have to be checking in with all the various interest groups.
Mm-hmm.
But this is one of those things where I'm hoping that we can have some support and move something into the conversation relatively soon. And if it's a topic that you have some expertise in, or that one of your listeners could help us fine tune a piece of legislation, we'd sure love if they contacted our office.
All right, very good. Now let's talk about water.
Yes.
So the whole situation in Flint is still tenuous, I guess is the word. And yesterday the governor announced he'll drink Flint water. Now you were pretty pointed just before the top of the hour in your reaction to that. You said,
I said what I think a lot of people are thinking. This smacks of a publicity stunt.
Okay.
Who walk me through this?
Yeah.
So he's going to go bottle a bunch of water, put it in gallon jugs in Flint, and then drive it back to his
already been done. Apparently.
His workplace in Lansing and back in Ann Arbor. I mean, listen, I appreciate that he's trying to show that he's going to live with this decision as well. He's drinking filtered water, but the reality is, to me, that really does cheapen some of the experience that's happening here. At the same time, he can go out to a restaurant and drink someone else's water. No one's going to see exactly the water he uses at home. This is not a real lived experience. This is essentially the equivalent of camping.
Okay, I understand your point. But if the governor's saying, listen, your water is good to drink, and Flint folks are saying, we don't trust you, what better way than to take a glass of that and gulp it down and take some home with you and do the same?
Because the reason that folks don't trust the water right now is because we haven't done things to actually fix all the pipes. And I get it. The EPA, the Department of Environmental Quality have been actually working really hard to try to increase the safety of those pipes. They've put the sealant back in. They're improving. Don't get me wrong. Those are all good things. But again, these are I think that this is one of those publicity stunts where it's saying, look, we solved the problem to the point where even I'm willing to drink a glass of water. But you haven't, because the reality is that we're going to have a long-term problem in Flint. And, again, the governor could have, done the same thing. He could have said, they could have issued the press release. They could have let us know it's safe. But at the end of the day, he gets to still walk away from all of this. He doesn't have to, worry about necessarily showering with the water or make sure that it is going to be safe 31 days from now. And that's why, like, I get it, but it really does to me smack of a publicity stunt.
So what should we be doing now that we're not doing?
Well, we don't have a real plan or funding mechanism to start fixing the pipes. And
who should pay for that?
Well, I mean, obviously, I think the state should pay for a big chunk of that.
Okay.
The Flint Water Crisis Task Force, they issued their report. And, they were scathing in this in saying that while there is responsibility at all levels, it is not equally distributed. The overwhelming majority of the decisions that resulted in the crisis came from a state takeover with the emergency manager and then the State Department of Environmental Quality failing to have proper controls.
Now, that's where I hear a difference. So when Representative Matern is here and Dr. Bison is here, that's the difference I hear is the purview from them is the problem started with a city council that didn't run their government well.
So you can say that the city council maybe made bad financial choices, and I think there's some data that says that may be the case, right? We could talk about why that happened, but even if we accept that premise, at no point did the city council say, we want to have a less safe drinking water system. And in fact, the bipartisan water task force that was handpicked by the governor's folks ultimately said the exact same thing. So with all due respect to my colleagues, to try to, to obscure who has culpability here is only spin. This report is extensive, it is well documented, it's bipartisan, and it is clear. The state has the lion's share of responsibility here because the problem resulted in a lack of control that was directly linked to the Department of Environmental Quality, and that was at the request of the state-appointed emergency manager.
Does Flint have any responsibility here?
Well, sure. And, I think that one of the things that we have to do moving forward is figure out how does Flint have ongoing accountability in this? How is we're going to make sure that Flint is maintaining new infrastructure as it's put in? Mm-hmm. And frankly, if they would like to help accelerate, I think that's a piece of what needs to be looked at as well. But the reality is that Flint needs to start replacing pipes, and they would not have had to replace them if it wasn't for the state's error, right? This is something that we all know from our daily lives. If someone else breaks your stuff, you make them pay for it. And that's exactly what happened here in Flint. The pipes were broken because the state broke them.
What about the rest of the state? We heard something about Grosse Pointe today, and we've heard something about Detroit, some other areas where lead levels may be higher than they should be. Should there be some sort of state program that evaluates the public water systems everywhere?
So we have state programs that do consistent water quality testing. But I think the big piece, and this is what I give Governor Snyder a lot of credit for, is that he said our infrastructure is old and It needs an update. And it's not just in Flint. We see it in Kalamazoo. We're seeing a whole bunch of areas. One thing that's in the current budget, for this upcoming budget, that's being proposed, is a $165 million infrastructure fund. Now, this wouldn't obviously be enough to even start tackling all the pipes at all. But what it would do is allow for research studies to leverage federal dollars, to incentivize local communities to invest more in their infrastructure. And this is a conversation we're going to have. I'm 32 years old. I feel really blessed that my grandparents and those before them built infrastructure. They decided we were going to pave the road so we could get to where we needed to go. They laid pipes so we could get clean water and deal with our sewer systems. And now we're talking about broadband and other utility information. Mm-hmm. But we have a responsibility to take care of that. And that means that the bill to redo some of the stuff is coming due. And now the question is, are we as a community going to rise to the need right now? And I think the answer should be yes. And the folks I talk to, they don't mind paying for this if the money goes where it's going to say it's going to go, and we hold the government accountable to then spend that money on what we want them to spend it on.
All right, we'll leave it there. Representative Jon Hoadley of Kalamazoo, thank you. We'll talk again soon. 8:30.